Iceland, a land of fire and ice. A land blessed by nature in so many incredible ways it's impossible to describe. But don't worry, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes doing exactly that. Iceland is well known as a winter destination to enjoy the breathtaking northern lights, when the sky is dark for much of the day. But if you visit during the summer, you can experience the opposite, the midnight sun, almost constant light, and there's just so much to see. It might not seem the most obvious place for a road trip from the UK. It's certainly not the cheapest, but it is definitely one you will never ever forget. So sit back, relax, and join me as I share one of the most incredible places I've ever had the good fortune to explore.
All right, you got this.
I don't got this. Hi, I'm Kat and I run the motorhome and travel website Wandering Bird. This is a speech that I did at the NEC Motorhome and Caravan show in October 2023. I know there are lots of you who couldn't get tickets because the show sold out. So for those of you who really wanted to see a little bit more about my Iceland trip, this is for you. Now, I quit my job as an air traffic controller a few years ago when I tour and live full time in my motorhome. Usually this is my rig, a swift escape, but on this particular trip up to Iceland, I was lent a Bailey Adamo 69-4 from Bailey of Bristol, and they said take it somewhere fun. So we pitched different ideas around and we eventually landed on the idea of taking their motorhome up to Iceland. Now, small confession, when I suggested the idea of Iceland to Bailey, knowing that I was going to be doing the trip by myself, I thought that there was a ferry from the north of Scotland. And I thought I could drive up to Scotland, get on the ferry, go around Iceland, come back again. And that on my own was doable. That's not too crazy in terms of mileage. Spoiler! There's no ferry from the north of Scotland. In fact, the only way that you can get a vehicle from the UK, from Bristol, in fact, up to Iceland, is to drive it across to France, then through Belgium, then through the Netherlands. I did stop for a couple of days at Amsterdam, which was amazing. Then through Germany and up to the very tippity top of Denmark, where you get on a ferry, or technically a cruise, and you take 2 days cruising across to the east coast of Iceland with a short stop in the Faroe Islands. 3,000 kilometres later, it was quite a long trip, but it was definitely worth it. Now, the ferry at the moment, there is only one boat that goes. It goes once a week. It's called the MS Nerona, and it is much more plush and luxurious than your usual ferry boats that go from the UK to France. You've got several restaurants on board. There's an indoor swimming pool and a gym. There are even hot tubs that you can hire. The cabins are lovely, and there's even your very own helipad, should you wish to fly in on your private helicopter. One thing to mention whilst I think about it, you can take dogs into Iceland, but they do need to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. Now, considering I was only there for 3 weeks, I wasn't going to do that to Mac, so I ended up with Crossfield, who is a Mac replica, and he's the one that you can see here in the picture. It's not actually my dog. Now, the biggest question I get asked, and I have been asked about this a lot, if I have actually done a video on this, is how much did the ferry from Denmark to Iceland and back cost? So for one 7-metre motorhome, I believe the Adamo 6.9, one person, that's me, all food and non-alcoholic drinks. I'm not a big drinker anyway, and on a crossing where I thought was going to get rough, definitely not going to drink alcohol. I did pay for a minibar each way. That was non-alcoholic, but it did include some soft drinks and bottles of water and crisps and snacks. And actually, when you tot up how much that would have cost apart from the minibar, if I'd bought them individually on the ferry, it was a lot cheaper to get the minibar, so I did do that. And all of that came to a grand total of around £4,000 for just that ferry trip. That doesn't include the ferries to get to and from the UK. I will at the end of this give a total for everything, but that was just the trip for the ferry. It is expensive. However, if you check out my earlier video, which I will link to around here somewhere, you can see the breakdown I did and the comparison between what it's like to fly and hire and what it's like to actually take your own vehicle and when it becomes more cost effective to do so. So I'll leave that video link for you so you can watch that if you would like to. So eventually you will end up on the east coast of Iceland in a little place called Seyðisfjörður, which is amazing. It's on the end of a fjord, so the cruise ship goes down this fjord and you end up there and you all get kicked off. Now, to go around Iceland on the ring road, it's basically a circle, so you can go clockwise or anti-clockwise. On the ferry they gave a small talk and they suggested that we go anti-clockwise. But it occurred to me that if we all got off the ferry and all went round anti-clockwise, we'd end up in all the same places at the same time. So I decided to be different and go down south or clockwise for a day, then turn around and go back again. And I did do this for one very specific reason, which I will get to shortly. But a question that I've been asked a lot is, does it matter which way round you go? The answer is no, not in the slightest. I suppose if you are going anti-clockwise, you're on the outside lane because they obviously drive on the other side of the road, which means that you will be closest to the sea and the scenery, but it really doesn't make all that much difference. So you'll arrive in Iceland and you will do two things on day one, especially if you're treated to such a wonderful weather as I was for the first few days. First thing I'm going to do is go I'm in Iceland. Everybody does, and it's fine. You can do that as many times as you like. The second thing you're going to do is stop and take a ridiculous number of photos. So my top tip for you is to make sure that everything is charged before you get off the boat. Make sure your phone is charged, your drone if you've got one, your GoPros, anything that you use to take photographs, make sure they are all charged because you're going to take a lot of them. I'm sorry, was I not stroking your tummy? The other thing, you don't get this on the stage, the other thing that you will realise on day one is the roads. Now, I will talk about the roads a little bit later, but on day one was when I realised something really, really important. Don't follow your sat-nav. I was actually using my phone, not the proper sat-nav on this trip, because I've been told there were no low bridges to avoid, and that's true. There aren't any low bridges or particular roads to avoid if you stick to the ring road. But my phone had decided that, don't go that way goes this, you could just go straight down. Turns out it put me on something called an F road, which are really, really bad. If you don't have a four-wheel drive, make sure you avoid these like the plague. It took me about 3 hours to do a couple of miles because I was going so slowly, so slowly. There were potholes and there was gravel, and the whole time I was thinking, this isn't my van, oh my goodness, it's a hire van, I don't want to damage it. The views were stunning, but make sure you avoid the F roads, they're not worth the drama that they cause. Now on the first night I obviously had to find somewhere to sleep. Now I didn't book anywhere on my trip in advance with the exception of the very last night. Obviously I knew what day I was going to get the ferry, it only comes once a week, and I knew I wanted to be at the campsite next to the port because the ferry was quite early in the morning. That's the only one that I booked up in advance. I went in June and July, which is peak season for the travel, and I didn't have any problems whatsoever. The campsites are easy to use, in fact they work beautifully because they almost work like airs in Europe, which means that you can turn up outside of normal campsite hours. You could turn up at 10 o'clock at night. I even turned up at one at 2 o'clock in the morning. Obviously there was no one there to greet me, but the way that most of them work is they're independent anyway, so you can turn up, find a pitch, if you want electric hookup and there's one available you can plug in, and then you just pay the next morning. They sometimes have QR codes which you scan and pay, or someone will come around and knock on your door, or if there's a reception you just go there and pay. Really, really straightforward. There is a scheme called the camping card. I believe it was about €180 to join, and that gives you access to reduced rates at several campsites around the island. My experience, having done some research on that, and I didn't actually use it, is that some of the campsites that you might want to stay at, like this one on the top left, is at Skogafoss Waterfall, and you can actually camp right in the grounds of Skogafoss Waterfall, which was amazing, but that's not part of the camping card scheme. So if you want a little bit more freedom and flexibility, and also don't forget that the campsites that are part of the scheme are going to get busier because everyone's going to head there. So if you want to be able to just make it up as you go along and not worry too much about any scheme, I would suggest you don't do it. However, if there are 3 or more of you in the van, you'll probably save quite a lot of money, especially if you're there for several weeks. So you might want to do your own research and decide whether it's right for you or not. And the reason that I had gone down south for the day was because I wanted to visit the Jökulsá Glacier Lagoon. Now, going to the Glacier Lagoon had been an ambition of mine for years, and I was so excited to be able to do it. And because the weather was so lovely when I arrived, I decided to make the most of this weather window and head down that way. And I'd also been told that if you go first thing in the morning on the very first trip you can get a seat on, something about the light makes the lagoon this incredible blue colour. I've not enhanced these photographs. It's genuinely what it looks like. It was absolutely amazing. So I went on the very first rib ride. Beauty of travelling solo is you can often squeeze in if there's a spare space, and it was just us and our sister rib out at 9 a.m. Go on the ribs, don't go on the bigger boats. It means you can get closer to the ice, and also you get to see incredible experience like this. We saw a seal. He was just chilling out on his iceberg. He hadn't been disturbed by anybody else on the lagoon yet. There were no canoeists or anybody else around, and it was just so peaceful and wonderful watching the wildlife out there. It was really a highlight of the trip for me. Now, when I put this presentation together initially, it was about 3.5 hours long because I was talking about all of my favourite places all over the island. And frankly, it's impossible to squeeze into a small amount of time. So what I've done is I've put together lists, I've separated by region and some of my favourite places in each region. So whether you're going to go around the entire island or whether you're just doing certain parts, you might find these useful. At the end, I'll give you a link, you can download it and you can actually see more about where they are and some of my favourite spots. But here are a few of my favourite ones in southeast Iceland. Now, as you move back, so obviously at the Glacier Lagoon, I turned around and went back anti-clockwise again. And you head in then to the northeast, which would be the first section that you came to if you went straight there from the ferry. And I have to say, I think if I went straight there from the ferry, I'd probably have been a little bit disappointed because the northeast is wonderful in a very barren, rugged, bleak sort of way. There's not a lot going on for the first few hours. In fact, make sure you fill up with fresh food and with fuel at the town called Egilsstaðir, which is the first town you come to when you get off the ferry, and that's sort of a fuel stop for a long while. So make sure you fill up there, and my advice for you as you go round the island is fill up when you get to about half full because the fuel stations are further apart than you might be used to. But like I said, there's not a whole lot going on in the northeast, but eventually you'll come to central northern Iceland, and here you'll find some of the really famous waterfalls like Godafoss and Dettifoss, and one of my absolute favourite places, which was Húsavík. Now, if you've seen the movie Eurovision Fire Saga, Húsavík is where it was filmed, and actually there's a cafe there called the Yaya Ding Dong Cafe. If you've seen the movie, you'll get the reference. But one of the things that Húsavík is most famous for is whale watching. It's one of the whale watching capitals of the world, and especially in June and July, they have something like a 98% success rate of seeing the whales. It was incredible. So again, I went out on a rib boat in the morning. They give you a warm suit. Make sure you wrap up so you're almost uncomfortably warm before you go out on the water because it was chilly when we were out there. But I was lucky enough to see 3 whales when I was out there. The first was a minke, and then we saw a fin, and then the last one, I got the guide so excited he could barely remember how to speak English. It was a blue whale, and obviously we only saw the back and then it was diving when we saw it, but less than 1% of the population of the planet have seen a blue whale. So I was really quite excited and humbled to be able to see that. The other thing that Húsavík did was made a massive dent in my bank balance, because Húsavík was where I discovered hot spring spas. Now there is a spa in Húsavík called GOC, that's the one here on the top right. It's like an infinity pool. It looks out over the fjord where I had been whale watching earlier that day, and it was just incredible to soak in the warm water. You can have a drink if you want one, and you can watch for whales. They see them all the time. I didn't see them when I was there, but apparently they see them all the time, especially during the summer, and in winter you can relax and stare at the northern lights. It was just one of my favourite places. If you are travelling solo like I was, it's not weird at all to go to these spas on your own. Plenty of people do it. It's not seedy or creepy. Nobody really talks to each other unless you look like you're open for conversation. It was just wonderfully relaxing, and I did then navigate my way around most of the rest of Iceland by the hot spring spas. They also have several natural ones all over the country. They have some that are just like sort of muddy puddles, but they're warm water, and they had a couple of campsites that had those in. And then there was also this waterfall which I saw, which was incredible. The water's warm. I'm not being all brave sitting here, and it was like 150 foot drop over the side of the cliff down into the fjord. I sat there for half an hour and had it to myself. It was magical, absolutely magical. So yeah, the hot spring spas, don't miss. My least favourite one, I have to say, was the Blue Lagoon. It was too crowded, too touristy, and too expensive. If you are in Reykjavik and you want an alternative to the Blue Lagoon, I really recommend Hvammsvík, the one here with the pools. It's got pools where they have varying temperatures, and you can, if you're feeling really brave and want to be truly Icelandic, you can hop over the walls into the cold waters of the fjord. I did do it. It lasted about 0.2 milliseconds. It was very, very, very cold. This is stupid. This is utterly stupid. Oh, God. Now, if you just go round the ring road, you will miss out a section in the northwest called the Westfjords, and they are totally worth detouring to if you've got enough time. They're like Iceland on steroids, which I know sounds ridiculous, but the mountains are bigger, the scenery's bigger. It's absolutely incredible. They've got glaciers, they've got the biggest fjord in Iceland there, they've also got several waffle houses, and they've got a couple of big towns as well if you feel like you need a little bit of civilization. The Westfjords are also the only place in Iceland where you can get white sand beaches, unlike the black sand beaches that you get elsewhere. So they're just a really lovely detour. Now, the Westfjords also did teach me a little bit more about the road system. So up till this point, most of the road on the ring road had been paved. Really easy to drive. You drive obviously on the European side, so not on the side that we do here in the UK, but it's really straightforward to navigate. Just remember that the ring road isn't a straight road. You do have to follow the direction, so you'll probably want some sort of sat nav, even if you just use it on your phone. But make sure you do pay attention to the turns, otherwise you could end up in all sorts of crazy places. But like I say, the roads are paved and very easy to drive, and the sections that aren't paved yet are, again, they're a little bit slower, but they are working on paving the entire thing. Now, I'm not a particularly nervous driver. I've driven all around Scotland. I did Applecross, Balloch na Bar. I've been through the Wicklow Mountains in Ireland and did some crazy roads in Ireland, but I managed to get through it fine, so I'm not particularly anxious. This road in the Westfjords made me incredibly anxious. It was raining, it was gravel, which was basically just mud. It was a sheer drop, there were no safety barriers, and then I realised it was a two-way road and I was on the outside. I could not wait to get down this hill. Don't let that put you off the Westfjords, but my advice would be to stick to the paved roads only. And if it looks like it's not a paved road, or there is a website you can check which will tell you if it's a paved road or not, I would avoid it like the plague, because it was really quite scary around that section. I think maybe because it is so much more remote, they're not quite so geared up for tourists doing crazy things in their motorhomes. Now, the southwest of Iceland is wonderful. I could talk about this for an hour just on its own. There's so many beautiful places to see. Don't miss Reykjavik. It's actually a really lovely city. It's got a fantastic vibe. There's all sorts of things to do in there. Make sure you go to the church and go up the very top. You can see incredible views from there. Rainbow Street is always good fun and definitely lots going on, and you can hire these little scooters that you can scoot around the city on. The other thing that was worth going to, maybe less so if you're male, is the Phallus Museum, which is exactly what you think it is, and there are various phalluses, phalli, whatever the correct plural for phallus is, various animals. It's quite macabre, it's quite random, but you're in Iceland, so just embrace the crazy. There are a couple of things that I really want to draw your attention to in the southwest that were just highlights of the trip. The first is Silfra. Now, Silfra is amazing. It's the only place on the planet where you can dive or snorkel between two tectonic plates. So the plates in Iceland, they're slowly drifting apart. It's made a big crevasse, and that's filled up with pure and very cold water that you can now dive or snorkel in. You can see the sort of trench there in that picture down in the bottom. Now, the company that you go with will give you a dry suit. You think, oh, that's not so bad. They'll then give you a neoprene hood and gloves, which seem to serve no purpose whatsoever because they don't keep you warm or dry. They will give you a snorkel, but then you realise that your face is left utterly exposed to the water, which is about 1 or 2 degrees. It is freezing. So you eventually work up the courage, you'll get your way in, you'll put your head under. After the initial gasp of shock at how cold the water is, you will go absolutely in awe of the colours. Again, I've not enhanced this video. The blues and the teals and the green was just unbelievable. We spent about 20 minutes in there, and don't get me wrong, 20 minutes was about enough. I was very grateful for the hot chocolate, but I'm so glad I did it. It was just a really wonderful experience. Talking about places that make you very cold, the only ice cave that you can see during the summer, again I went in June and July, is Katla. It's actually down near a town right on the south coast called Vik, and they have these enormous super jeeps. They drive you out to the glacier, and Katla, which is an active volcano, it's actually well overdue for an eruption, which they took great delight in telling us. They were all wearing their safety devices, and if it buzzed, we all had to get bundled into the super jeep and drive like bat out of hell out of there. But Katla's the active volcano. It's underneath the glacier, and a combination of the heat of that and also the water on the glacier, it forms these ice caves. They last about 3 or 4 months apparently, so this one that I saw in June is probably at the end of its life by now, but it was absolutely fascinating to see how the water had created this hole in the glacier. And we could also see another one that was just starting to form. You can see all the water sort of running through it. So if you do get a chance, absolutely go and do that. Now, I can't talk about Iceland with talking about volcanoes and the black sand beaches and also lava. Now, there's plenty of volcanoes around Iceland. Most of them are dormant or dead, but there are a few that are still, in fact 2 days after I left, one erupted, so I was quite grateful that I missed that, although part of me would love to have seen it. But there are plenty that you can park up nearby, and they've got some steps up and you can walk down, you can see into some of them have got lakes that are formed then in the crater, and other ones you can just see them how they were. So that's quite good fun to see. A thing that I did that I really enjoyed, you could do them both in Reykjavik and in Vik, is a lava show. And this is where they collect up the black sand off the beach, they heat it to 1,000 degrees C, and then let it flow into the trench in the middle of the auditorium. The heat of it and the smell of it was absolutely like nothing else I've ever experienced. It was incredible to watch it, and then you can watch it as it cools down to this bright vibrant pink, and as it cools, it's the crust that cools first, so the inside is still ridiculously warm. And all around Iceland you can get these lava cave networks. I actually got to go into one, and this is formed by the crust has cooled down to a point but the inside still moves, and it creates these huge caverns and cave networks. So if you get to do one of them as well, that's really worth doing. Now, half of the initial presentation that I created were photos of waterfalls, and obviously couldn't keep them all in, but 3 of my favourites happen to be down here in the south. Skogafoss, it's really famous. An advantage of having your own vehicle is that you can ideally visit places and everyone else has gone home. So most of the tours go sort of 9 to 5-ish. So if you can arrange, and to be fair, the midnight sun helped a lot with this. I ended up getting up at sort of lunchtime and then travelling around and getting to campsites like 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And if you can do that, you'll get some amazing places almost yourself. In fact, Skogafoss was where that campsite was. I ended up there at 4 AM on my own and had it just to myself. It was amazing. Slandafoss you can also walk behind, so that's quite cool and eerie. But one of my other favourites is Kvernefoss, which is just round the corner from Skogafoss, but no one seems to know it there. It's like this sort of canyon, it's like something out of Lord of the Rings, and you walk in and this waterfall just gets revealed. It's amazing. So make sure you add that to your itinerary if you're going. Now, in the talk that I did, I gave a roundup of my costs for just in Iceland, but I'm actually going to give you guys on YouTube a roundup of my costs for the entirety of the trip. So this is from leaving the UK until coming back to the UK again. I hope you found that useful. If you would like the free mini guide to my trip to Iceland and all the different regions and places that I enjoyed, I'll leave you the link for that. And if you want the in-depth itinerary of where I stayed and other places that I recommend you visit and other tips to help you plan your own trip, my Iceland road trip planner is now live. I'll leave the link here and with a discount code for you as well. I hope you found that useful. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care. Bye.